Unforgettable, uncensored, unforgivable. The Unspoken Podcast with Tom Albano, Nick Fodera, and Nick Morgasen on the Undetermined Podcast Network.
You're listening to the Unspoken Podcast, Cheap Seat Sports Production by the Undetermined Podcast Network. It's episode number 53. Tom Albano along with Nick Fodera and Nick Morgasen as always. Gentlemen, a lot to talk about this week.
Yes, we do. So let's not waste any time. Let's jump right in.
This is crazy week and a lot to get to, including a great interview at the end of the show.
Yeah, for the second half of the podcast, we're going to have Mike Ferrin of MLB Network Radio on. And before we get into everything, go like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, follow us on Periscope, and follow us on our new Instagram account, all at the UDUP. We finally have an Instagram.
Joke's on us. It's just pictures of cats.
Or LeVar Ball.
Oh, God. Please limit the LeVar Ball. All right. So, first of all, let's get to the front page. Now, normally you would think maybe we're talking about MLB Free Agency or the recent NFL games, but we have something more serious to talk about, and that is the latest in the case of former U.S. Olympic gymnastics Dr. Larry Nasser.
This story is so far-fetched, and if you're a fan of USA gymnastics in the Olympics, and if you followed the Olympics for many years, and actually the three of us, the class we took, a good portion of it was on the Olympics, and excuse me, we got to learn a lot about how the Olympics were actually handled from the media perspective. But this story is, you can almost compare it. What?
Horrifying.
It's horrifying and
heartbreaking, infuriating. It's all those things.
You can almost compare this to the Jerry Sandusky incident, where things are happening behind the scenes, and I don't know why we're just finding this out now. And there's other issues involved here. You have University of Michigan that's involved in this situation. You have USA Gymnastics that's in this situation.
Actually, we just found out maybe within the last 24 to 48 hours that supposedly U.S. Gymnastics allegedly
knew about this and did nothing.
They took, what's the girl's name? Allie Raisman?
Allie Raisman, yeah.
They went to Allie and went, hush, hush.
Well, yes, because I think they made her sign either an affidavit or an agreement that to basically hide it.
So what we know so far is that Larry Nasser, who was the Olympics, basically their doctor for the U.S. gymnastics team, is accused of sexually abusing up to 150 of his patients, including most of the women on the U.S. gymnastics team, and the numbers are frankly staggering. It's enough to make you enough to make you very, very, very angry.
And it's everyone from the people who weren't stars on that team to the likes of Allie, the likes of Michaela, and now Simone Biles coming out.
Well, and also, right, I was going to say that Simone Biles actually came out. I'm trying to see if I can find it because I posted it. She came out and made a huge statement on Twitter, and I can't seem to... Oh, I found it. So Simone Biles wrote this huge statement. I'm not going to read the whole thing because it's long, but she basically said, I'll read you the most interesting part of this. So it says, "For too long, I've asked myself, was I too naive? Was it my fault? I now know the answer to those questions. No, it was not my fault. No, I will not and should not carry the guilt that belongs to Larry Nasser and USAG and others. It is impossibly difficult to relieve these experiences, and it breaks my heart even more to think that as I work towards my dream of competing in Tokyo of 2020, I will have to continually return to the same training facility where I was abused." Now, let me have an update on that statement, because I heard that they're actually going to be closing the U.S. gymnastics facility where Nasser was working with the actual gymnasts. So maybe they got what they wished for.
I would imagine they are, but this actually goes deeper because, as you said before, he worked for the University of Michigan as their athletic director or their
I think the athletic doctor.
The athletic doctor, yeah.
Yeah, and they were hearing complaints about this Mr. Nasser and what he was actually doing to his female patients. And, of course, they tried to sweep it under the rug, much like we saw with Sandusky and with the Title IX violations with Baylor.
Well, guys, We do have some audio. First, we have some audio of a recent interview Ali did. I believe it was with Today. So
yeah, this is with Hoda Kotb of the Today Show, and basically, just so there's context, Ali Raceman was very honest about what happened with Larry Nasser, and basically she came out and said, I don't like the way the situation was handled, and I finally need to speak out on it, basically.
It is so disturbing to me what he did to me and so many other people. This is so much bigger than just me. I mean, it's such a horrific thing to happen, and I stand here with all the other survivors that have been abused by Larry and other people that have been abused by anyone, but it's disgusting. And, I actually got a letter 36 hours after I spoke up in August from a 14-year-old girl, and she said she read my statements, and because of that, she had the courage to tell her mother that her father had been sexually abusing her, and he threatened her life at times. And so I realized that letter is more important to me than any medal I've ever won in my life. They're not doing everything they can. They keep releasing pretty much the similar statement that they welcome to work with me. But what people don't realize is after the private investigator came to see me in 2015, I made it clear that he was touching me, making me uncomfortable, but I was making excuses for him, which I realized later that's often what people do when they're manipulated. And so I kept reaching out saying I wanted to meet with her again, because after I had time to process it, I realized this is really bad. And I was basically told, just to kind of keep it quiet and that they were handling it.
And I remember going back to maybe an earlier episode when another one of the Olympic girls...
It was Michaela Maroney.
But I remember there was one of the Olympic girls that came out and was like kind of against the team. It was like, we have to be more conscious about ourselves. Simone Biles, I don't want to say yelled at her, but said, think about the team. And then both of them come out with their stories later. And I would normally think, oh, why, this later stuff? But now you're realizing how much of a manipulator he allegedly was.
Right. And basically this story goes tenfold because, excuse me, basically now you're seeing, like Nick said before, the 140 to 150 people coming out as victims. And you know what? I put this blame on USA Gymnastics. And I don't want to hear, Michigan is partially at fault, but this is USA Gymnastics. Where was USA Gymnastics when all this shit was going on? And we hear this before, and I'll even bring it up again with Jerry Sandusky. The college knew. Paterno knew. People were just so in the mirror in rose-colored glasses, they didn't want to pay attention to the situations that were going on. So I feel like this is the classic case of USA Gymnastics, you fucked up, and now it's coming back to bite you in the ass.
It's the symptom, not the cause. It's endemic to North American sports, and really the IOC in general. It's a horribly corrupt institution, and here it comes back to bite them in the ass.
And it's sad because this is 150 people more than those who have to suffer. There shouldn't be anybody suffering.
Yeah, exactly. 150 more people than there should have been.
This is sad.
Disgusting. Despicable.
I'm sorry. This is totally fucked up. And I'm sorry for all the language and whatever, but basically this thing is so messed up that USA Gymnastics, in my opinion, should not be allowed to compete in the Olympics this year. Sorry.
That's where we get into a gray area, because now you're taking away the dreams of those who, those who weren't at fault for this, those who are victims of this, because Simone Biles, she has her story, and yet she wants to compete in 2020.
Yeah, but the problem is, like Nick said, with IOC and the USA IOC, the standpoint of why were they not on top of this? If this was happening for years, like those testimonials were saying, if you heard that one woman, she said that this started happening in kindergarten.
I know.
Okay, so why is this guy not behind bars already? I don't get it.
Oh, he will be. I don't think we need to worry that Larry Nasser won't be spending the rest of his life rotting in a jail cell. That's not up for debate here.
Yeah,
the thing is, what can we do to stop this from ever happening again?
I don't think you can. I don't think you can. That's the problem. And we could all say, oh, we could have a 1,000% better vetting process. And you would think that Nasser was vetted before he was given the job for USA Gymnastics, because he's working with essentially teenage girls so they could compete in the Olympics. That, like Tom said, there's a gray area. This is a gray area too, with a older male doctor working with younger girls.
How is that allowed?
That's what I'm saying. Why wasn't it a female doctor? Usually with the males, it's male doctors, and for female, it's female doctors. So I don't understand where this mix-up happened.
My only thing about what I was saying to Gray also, as I was saying before with the about the possible punishment, because I said maybe they shouldn't, you said that they shouldn't be allowed, and I said, well, what about the people who have trained? And yet this is something similar to Penn State, because Penn State was given pretty much the bowl death penalty for 4 years. I'm like, well, that's not the fault of the incoming freshman. That's not the fault of the players.
But wait, they were allowed to transfer out. They were given waivers to transfer out. Now,
Right,
this is a different situation. I agree with you, Tom, because it's not like you can say, okay, I can't compete for USA. I'll go compete for another country. It's a different situation. So,
well, at least not everybody. I mean, I know somebody who last Winter Olympics competed for the U.S. bobsled team, and now they're competing for the Jamaican bobsled team this coming Olympics.
yeah, but you actually have to have a citizenship, I think, to actually compete.
Right. No, but I'm saying not everybody has that.
Right.
There's
And
nothing that the IOC can do at this point to smooth this over.
it's not like money is going to make this go away like it does in most sports.
Not going to make this go away. Firing him, there has to be a complete culture change with the way the gymnastics is, the way this works from top to bottom, A to Z, alpha to omega, needs to change. That's how you stop this from happening.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, in the long run, and I'll finish it with this. Am I glad they finally got to the bottom of it? Yes. But, like I said before, this is it took way too long and 140 victims too soon to figure this out. And I'm glad that Raceman came out. I'm glad that Biles came out. I'm glad that Raceman actually sat down and did an interview with the Today Show, because it proved that she wanted to get this out there. And you could say this is part of the Me Too movement, which I think it does belong with partially, because we're having this problem in Hollywood and now we're having the problem in the sports world. But I'm glad that it's finally being handled and this asshole is going to be behind bars.
Absolutely, absolutely. Guys, let's now move on to the 2-minute drill. I mean, we've had quite a bit of football action recently, and this weekend was absolutely... what's the word? How would you describe this weekend's football?
This past weekend or this coming weekend?
Yeah, this past weekend.
Electrifying.
Well, I guess you could say that it was so out there that the Vikings were blowing their horns.
And you know what? Let's get the 2 minutes rolling. All right, so let's start it off, of course, with the Eagles and the Falcons. And classic Falcons, they choke again. It's clockwork at this point.
Why are we surprised by these things?
Yeah, I don't understand why we're so surprised by this, because the Falcons, we don't have to go back to the 28-0 bullshit in the Super Bowl, but you know what? Is it a good team? Yes, but they can't seem to put it together in the playoffs.
No, and they got destroyed by Nick fucking Foles. Speaking of destroyed, New England destroyed Tennessee. It wasn't even funny. Jacksonville defeated Pittsburgh. Now, I had mentioned Pittsburgh always played down to their opponents, but after Jacksonville's shitty win against Buffalo, I thought maybe, just maybe, that Pittsburgh would come on top and actually not play down to their competition, but nope. Instead, Blake Bortles is playing the AFC Championship game, and Morgasen, you were commenting it was all about the ego of Pittsburgh.
It is all about the ego of Pittsburgh. And basically, you know what? I feel like Pittsburgh thinks that they're above and beyond most of the competition. And you know what? I guess they paid for it, because Jacksonville is no slouch defensively, and we saw that. And you know what?
Although they do have more holes than you would think a defensively loaded team would be. I mean, they won the game, but they still had 42 points hung on them.
But they're still a great defense.
That's the scary part. They're a great
defense, but I don't know how much to attribute to this to Todd Haley's spectacularly fucking boneheaded plays.
You know what? And we can go back to that one play with the botched and the block punt or whatever, but you know what? I think Pittsburgh just played down to its competition. They thought this was Jacksonville from 5 years ago. So
they looked ahead to New England. That's what happened. And lastly, guys, let me just play the radio call of the Minnesota Vikings radio team.
Case on a deep drop, steps up in the pocket. He'll fire to the right side, caught by Diggs. Stay up! Oh, he got loose! Oh, my God! 30! No! 10! Touchdown! Are you kidding me? It's a Minneapolis miracle! Stephon Diggs and the Minnesota Vikings have walked up on the New Orleans Saints!
The Minnesota Vikings defeating the New Orleans Saints. On the very last play, Case Keenum throws a pass to Stephon Diggs, and rather than Stephon Diggs stepping out of down and going for the field goal, Marcus Williams, the rookie defenseman of the Saints, collides with his own man, leaving Diggs open, runs to the end zone for a game-winning touchdown.
Well, now everyone saw after the game the Marcus Williams crying memes or whatever these memes were. They were funny as hell, but you got to feel bad for the guy. But at the same time, what fancy footwork by Stephon Diggs to just stay in bounds. Now that was taking a risk, because if he fell down in bounds,
that would be game over.
The game is over. And you know what? I'm going to go to this point now because I know we're going to run out of time for it. But I need to call out a writer, because you know what? I like the New York Post at times, but at this point, I am going to crap on the New York Post because it's Nick's favorite writer. Ha 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 ha. Mr. Phil Mushnick.
And those of you who listen to the show for a bit know my issues with him, if we could call it that.
Right. So you listen to this, Tom, because Nick and I discussed this before.
Okay.
In our pre-show meeting. So he came out and basically said, even the most exciting games now come with a price, a challenge to swallow what you can't stomach. It's the modern barter system. In order to enjoy, you must suspend your sense of common sense. Has the last play hero of any game ever looked like a bigger jerk than Vikings wide receiver Stephon Diggs did?
Because of the freaking helmet toss.
Right.
So the helmet toss, the arms crossing in the end zone, and the scowl he gave to the cameras.
It was a game-winning touchdown.
Right. It was a game-winning.
The biggest game that guy has ever played in. The biggest game that Minneapolis has ever seen in the last 40 goddamn years. My father, who's been watching this team for 50 years, says that is the greatest game I've ever seen them play.
My father was going nuts when that touchdown happened. Hope was practically lost.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry, though, Mr. Mushnick, but you're a crotchety old hag. And
it's the. I'm sure he's a nice person, and everything and people have said he actually is good to talk to, nice person. But his columns are the equivalent of "get off my lawn." They are.
Well, let me read something else for you, okay? Because it gets worse. So, first, despite Diggs' post-touchdown peacocking. Now, I said this to Nick before. Who uses the word peacocking anymore?
Peacocks don't.
So it says, first, despite Diggs' post-touchdown peacocking, the Vikings are not playing in the NFC Championship game because he made a play, then took it to the house with 0 seconds on the clock. The Vikes are alive because of two steadily regressive elements of fundamental football. One, players' pitiful unawareness of game and clock circumstances, and two, the continued replacement of tackling with risky attempts to cause a fumble or injury by using one's body as a no-hands, often misguided missile.
Basically, it's basically just one long fart noise in paragraph.
Essentially. But you know what? As Tom said, the guy scored a touchdown, and I'm not even going to go down to the second half where we were looking, but he basically made a statement how he was holding out the ball with one hand, and he said if he dropped the football, he would have looked like an idiot. And you know what? Phil Mushnick, you need to grow. Well, I shouldn't say grow up. He's an old man in a kid's body at this point. But this article is ridiculous. This is the donkey of the week right here.
All right, guys, let's get into a very quick prediction time. Let's start with Eagles versus Vikings. I mean, the Vikings defense is phenomenal. I think they could eat up Nick Foles, give the offense of the Eagles some problems. But at the same time, they did blow a 17-point lead and nearly lost the game to the Saints.
It all depends on how they come out at the beginning of each half. And you come out fast, but don't if you start off fast, do not let up on the gas for 1 second. I mean, don't underestimate the Eagles either.
No, you can't. And
after Pittsburgh lost to Jacksonville, you can't underestimate anybody.
No. And you know what? The way the Eagles are, I mean, I know we don't have Carson Wentz, and if they have Carson Wentz, they're probably the favorites in this game.
Absolutely.
And I think this is really a coin flip at this point. And the funny point, and Tom, I think you and I spoke about this. Is it irony that these two quarterbacks belong to Jeff Fisher?
I know there's a whole. I'm sure you guys out there all know about this meme, but for those of you who don't, context is necessary. At one point, Foles and Keenum were both a part of the then St. Louis Rams, coached by Mr. Jeff Fisher.
Yeah,
Jeff mediocrity himself.
Jeff Fisher should just retire and go sit on the porch, just like what we were talking about before. But you know what? The Eagles and Vikings, it's a good matchup. It could lead to a bit of history if the Vikings win. And
to put it in the context of the words of one of my favorite YouTubers, Urinating Tree, aka Schlosser, one legacy of failure is going to play in the Super Bowl.
It's a good point, actually.
Then it emerges from its chrysalis and becomes a legacy of success.
Maybe if they get past the winner of Pats Jags.
Well,
but I mean,
looking at the line for the game, though, Minnesota is -3, so I guess they have Minnesota as the favorite right now. So it's.
And honestly, I'm going to let a little bias come in. I think Minnesota's got it. I think at some point Philadelphia's luck with Foles is going to run out. They were still shitty in the last 2 weeks of the regular season.
The game's at Lincoln Financial Field, by the way.
Yeah.
So
we see what happens, but I'm still going to pick the Vikings.
I'm still picking the Vikings.
Go with my heart.
No, I think I still got the Vikings, but it's going to be interesting. This is going to be a battle of two actually pretty good defenses. So, but I think, like you said, this is not Nick Foles from 4 or 5 years ago who was filling in for, who was it, McNabb at that point?
I don't think it was McNabb, no.
Who was it? Or was Nick Foles the starter?
I think he was the starter.
Yeah, he was. He was, I think.
Oh, yeah, you're right. So, but this is not, let's make him the MVP from 4 or 5 years ago guy. This is, let's get lucky and hope we make it to a Super Bowl with a backup quarterback guy.
And now, guys, quickly, AFC Championship game. It's the Pats versus the Jags. Now, developing story. I'm not taking this seriously, but apparently all the NFL people are. It's developing story. Tom Brady questionable for the game, and he actually said, we'll see about playing. During a practice, I think it was Thursday, somebody ran into Tom Brady at practice and jammed his throwing hand or something like that.
Yes, I think it was a running play, actually, that he might have hit his hand against somebody's helmet. Ian Rappaport just put this report out about 2 minutes ago that Patriots quarterback Tom Brady was a limited participant in practice today and is officially listed as questionable. Let me think about that for 2 seconds. Don't care. He's going to start.
TB12. It's TB12.
Even if he broke his hand, he would chop off his own, chop off the hand of a derelict, and then sew that hand on. He's that evil.
Let's put it this way.
But you know what? Because of what we've seen from the Jags so far, I still have to pick the Patriots. But seeing as how we know this Patriots team is flawed, we know where we can hit them. I'm still picking the Pats, but I'm expecting to be surprised.
Well, here's the interesting thing about the injury, though. The injury is actually to his throwing hand. So, and they're saying that it could be a thumb ligament issue. So if he can't grip the football, this might actually make it a closer game than we thought. Now, according to...
Actually, I think it will be a closer game regardless.
It will. It definitely will.
The line on the game is New England -7.5, which is a lot closer of a line than I thought they were going to give.
than they
But-
normally get in the playoffs this time of year.
I'm still going to go with New England, guys, because I have to keep my bold prediction up of New England losing in the playoffs. I mean, in the Super Bowl. But there's something else that's been talked about. Who is the guy in operations in the Jaguars? So who is that? That would be Tom Coughlin, aka the head coach.
No, don't go there. Please don't go there.
The old man who plays knick-knack on everybody's gates. It's old man Coughlin once again.
Oh, are you really going to go there and say that because he's with the Jaguars organization, he's going to have some kind of curse on the Patriots?
Not a curse, maybe a plan. I don't, but like I said, I'm still picking the Pats. I still think, because he does have one loss to the Patriots. I still think, and it's a different team, so I think the Patriots are still. It's TB12 and the Pats. He is football's John Cena.
Let's
Please
put it
stop
this
calling
way.
him that. He sounds like a tuberculosis shot when you. Do that.
Well, let's put it this way. And I said it on last week's podcast that the Patriots are going to take away the running game of Leonard Fournette. And Blake Bortles is not going to throw the ball 50 times like he did against the Pittsburgh. So it's not going to happen. And I just think it's a different boat in general from the Steelers to the Patriots. The Patriots and Bill Belichick have a game plan. And that's basically stuffing Leonard Fournette and forcing Blake Bortles to throw it 40 to 50 times, forcing interceptions, and just playing TB12 football.
All right, guys, it's time for another news. We're just going to go through a bunch of other stories going on in the sports world quickly. Let's start with the coaching carousel. So some latest news going around with the coaches. The Vikings offensive coordinator, Pat Shurmur, looking like he will become the next head coach of the Giants. Josh McDaniels, the coordinator at New England, looking like he is going to become the next head coach of the, I think it's the Colts.
The Colts, yes.
And it is going to be, honestly, I don't know what to expect out of Pat Shurmur.
You know what? Wait a minute. I don't understand. Like, if they actually win the Super Bowl, is he really going to leave a Super Bowl contender to go to the Giants?
Possibly. I mean, it is a head coaching position.
I understand, but that's a Super Bowl ring. Like, that's like leaving a World Series team and going to, like, the Tampa Bay Devil Rays or Rays.
But I mean, I don't know how it's going to affect a team as much. I mean, let's look at New England. They must have gone through, 9 coordinators, and still look at all the Super Bowl rings.
That's because Bill Belichick is like a coaching tree. He just keeps sprouting heads into new people.
He's actually the coaching hydra.
Actually, and supposedly some of the players aren't liking Shurmur already because he's kind of a hard ass. But honestly, I think that's what the Giants need right now after all the shit of last season.
Yeah, but is really hard ass the way to go after McAdoo didn't really work as a hard ass?
I still think he's still a great offensive coordinator, still a great coach. Give him a shot.
I guess you could, but you know what? If they win the Super Bowl, I wouldn't leave. That's just, how do you leave a team once they win the Super Bowl?
I understand, but I'm putting my trust in Gettleman here. I'm putting my trust that Gettleman knows what he's doing.
Oh, God, I wouldn't put the trust in the Giants or the Jets front office after the shit I've seen.
Let's go over to a couple of the NBA stories that are going around. Nick, talk to us about the Rockets-Clippers situation that happened.
Oh my God! All right, so
Regale us.
It seemed like chaos happened. Now, let's give a little context. So, Chris Paul traded from the Clippers to the Rockets. Patrick Beverly, I can't even pronounce his name. Beverly, there we go. I think he's on the Rockets now, and basically bad blood. And Blake Griffin and Chris Paul don't really get along, and apparently Chris Paul called Blake Griffin a bitch on the court, which I can kind of agree because Blake Griffin's not really that good of a player anymore. All he's known for high flying dunks over a stupid Mercedes-Benz car, but you know what? I would call him a bitch too because he's dating Kendall Jenner, but that's a whole different story. Okay. But basically, a fight broke out on the court, and then after the game, the Rockets decided to enter the Clippers locker room to go after Austin Rivers. Ironically, the coach's son of Doc Rivers. And they said, you know what? Let's go have a fight in the locker room after the game.
Oh, God.
And you know what? it's kind of childish shit. These guys make so much money. They make millions of dollars, and they're fighting like 5-year-olds in the locker room. And apparently one of the players tried to enter from the back door, and some of the other players tried to enter from the front of the locker room, almost like an attack in a FBI Men in Black movie where they try to enter in from both sides.
Somebody's head's popping out of the toilet. Let me at him.
Yeah, basically. And you know what? It's childish bullcrap. And I think Trevor Ariza actually got suspended 2 games after the whole incident. And
a couple of them got suspended 2 games. And I think there were a couple of them that didn't get any because they said they were acting like peacemakers.
Oh, give me a break. James Harden shouldn't be a peacemaker. A guy who just got a new contract for $200+ million. And you know what? It's childish bullcrap. I think they all should have gotten suspended. They weren't, and they should be fined. And since James Harden's making that much money, they should fine him like $1 million or whatever. But that's not going to happen. And,
all right, let's talk about Rajon Rondo and Isaiah Thomas.
Ugh, God, I can't explain this story, but basically, Rajon Rondo came out and said that Isaiah Thomas should not get a normal, I don't know what they call it, like
celebration, a thank you.
Celebration victory lap montage.
A tribute video when he comes back.
Well, he was scheduled to get one, wasn't it like last week or 2 weeks ago when they Cavs and the
Yes, but he was hurt. He wasn't back yet. And you know what? Do it. The team can do what they want. It's their own home arena. They can do. I think Rajon Rondo was just a little jealous because he was on the team. They won, and his time basically ran out. And then he became a deadbeat as an NBA player. So jumping from like the Kings to, I think he's with the Pelicans now. I think I don't know what team he's with at this point, but he's just jealous because Isaiah Thomas is actually on a team that's actually going to compete for an NBA title, unlike Rajon Rondo.
We've also got, speaking of NBA contenders, we have LeBron and Kyrie Irving. So a report came out that supposedly LeBron actually didn't want Kyrie Irving traded.
You know what? I think this is LeBron.
Yes, I'll believe that.
Yeah, I think this is LeBron James backing on his words a little bit, because if you look at the situation with the Cleveland Cavaliers at this point, they almost forgot how to play basketball a little bit. And if you saw their most recent game against the Orlando Magic, who are the worst team in the NBA, they have the NBA's worst record.
Did they lose?
No, they didn't lose, okay. But
they almost lost.
They were up 31 at halftime. And in the fourth quarter, they ended up trailing by 1.
Right, that's right.
And they had a fight with LeBron James to win this game. And the last
somebody else lost to the Magic. I forget who.
What?
Somebody else lost to the Magic. Somebody's win streak got snapped, I think, by the Magic. I forget who it was.
I don't remember at this point. It actually might have been the Warriors, but I can't remember at this point. But the Cavaliers have a problem. They have an ego problem. They have an old age problem. They're one of the oldest rosters in the NBA right now. And LeBron is at the same time is trying to decide, am I going to be with this team next year? So let's put it this way. Cleveland is probably up in arms at this point. And I think that the Celtics, this is a bold statement, and you can remind me of this when we talk NBA playoffs. The Celtics are going to be the number 1 seed this year.
I actually can kind of see that. Now, do I think that they'll play in the finals? I think there's a chance, but what we say about the Pats, I say about the Cavs and LeBron James.
They always seem to be in it no matter what.
So
you know what? How intriguing would it be in the Eastern Conference Finals to have LeBron versus Kyrie?
Yes, and
I think that is going to be a matchup.
It would be intriguing for me to have a monkey butler, but that's not actually going to happen.
I hate to go to the super serious, but there is a sad story you have to talk about, and that is Washington State quarterback Tyler Hilinski dying on Thursday Tuesday afternoon, and they officially ruled it a suicide.
Ugh. That's a terrible story. I mean, I don't know. Do we have any confirmation of why he did it or no?
He left a note, but
he left a note. He played 8 games for Washington State. He actually was a starter in a Holiday Bowl, and he was scheduled to become the starter of the team because the original starter for this year had graduated.
And
so
you feel horrible for the guy and his family. I mean, so condolences to them. Really,
right.
These guys have a lot of pressure on them when they play college sports, and sometimes it just gets to them so bad they don't know what else to do.
And we often don't realize it until it's too late.
Right. Mm-hmm. And we're hearing this whole thing, and we can have this debate on another podcast on whether college athletes deserve to be paid or not. And sometimes these athletes who come to these colleges on full ride scholarships, they don't have any money as a family to live.
And they're under so much pressure to succeed.
Yeah, because if their stock drops, then they're gonna have to go find a real job.
Well, not a real job, but a good paying job.
That's what I mean. Yeah,
it's something that's hard enough for us to do, and when we just sit here and talk about sports.
Guys, some news came in recently about the MLB PA clock. The MLB clock, but basically the statement came out, and I guess they're not going to have a clock this season. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, and that's what you were hearing, Tom. That the MLB PA and Rob Manfred and Major League Baseball could not come to an agreement on rules for the pitch clock. Now, I was reading something interesting. A few people were bringing up on Twitter the past couple of days that you have a dilemma, a problem by putting the pitch clock in. And I said, wow, this actually makes sense. Okay. And the problem is the pitch clock with someone on base. So if you have a pitch clock limit, you could just take off. And if the pitch limit recedes, then they could just steal the base.
Plus, they don't want to have to keep relearning. You would have to learn to pitch quicker, and a lot of pitchers don't have this very lanky delivery that takes a long time. And
now, help me understand this. So, what if there's a pickoff attempt? Does that mean the clock keeps resetting?
I would think that if there's a pickoff, that if they're trying to do the rules the way they are, you would have to keep the pitch clock going. But
oh wow.
So it'd be like having a genie and wishing for more wishes.
Kind of, yeah. And you know what? I'm not a fan of it. I wish there's other ways to make the game quicker. You don't need a pitch clock. You need to keep people in the box, which they started to make a rule that you have to keep 1 foot in the box. Now, you can't step out of the box, even though the umpires are not enforcing it. And there's other things you could do. Stop the pitchers and catchers' visit to the mound so many times.
That's something MLB Network was recently talking about, actually.
You know what? And I think I brought this up to you guys last season when we were talking about Major League Baseball, is that if you have more than 2 visits, you should be penalized a ball in the count.
And that's actually my concern with this pitch clock, because if you're saying that they have to keep it going, I mean, a 20, 30-second pitch clock, then for every pickoff attempt, that's a ball. That's not helpful for the pitcher.
And what's next? If you're going to have to put a rule in like they do in, I think, the NFL, where you're going to have to call a timeout now in Major League Baseball, because now you're going to have a pitch clock.
And that's not going to help anymore with the time.
So
it's going to make it longer.
No, so now you're going to have to give 3 timeouts to the manager on the bench in Major League Baseball to say, all right, I need a timeout so I can go talk to my pitcher.
This is getting ugly. Guys, speaking of, before we get into a little bit of free agency talk, some breaking news came out recently for us. Robbie Anderson of the Jets arrested.
You know what? He deserved it. That's pretty much what I could say at this point. And I know, Nick, you had a lot to say about this, and he's up on 9 charges, which I don't feel like reading again. We talked about it in the pre-show meeting.
It was stuff like, resisting arrest, speeding, threatening to sexually assault the wife of the police officer that arrested him.
Now, if that doesn't scream Me Too movement, and that doesn't scream I should be suspended for a year, I don't know what does.
Especially if when they search the car. Now, they haven't said anything about if he was high or intoxicated or something, but if they find something, let's see, that would be high in intoxication, that would be threat of sexual assault, speeding, arrest, resisting arrest. Yeah, that's worth a year's suspension, buddy. At least.
Does that remind
the
you?
Old South Florida cocktail.
Does that remind you of someone who just got reinstated into the NFL?
And who are you referring to?
What's his name with the Browns?
Oh, Josh Gordon?
Josh Gordon.
Josh Gordon did many things. Like he got caught speeding, doing drugs, and we're going down the same path as Josh Gordon again.
This is why nobody takes the discipline of the NFL seriously.
Nobody. You know why? Because Mr. Goodell is running it.
Well, you know what? We're gonna see the NFLPA like they did with Ezekiel Elliott. They're gonna fight this because if he's not on the field, then New York's not gonna have anything relevant. And if New York's not relevant, then the NFL's not relevant. So
it's like, how can we take this financial firm seriously when we have actually Bozo the Clown running it? Hear about our IPAs, folks.
But you know what? If Goodell actually does something right and actually spends it for a year, and the NFLPA, tries to reduce it, I'll see the NFLPA as the bad guys. I'll actually see Goodell as the good guy. And you know what? That's something I never thought I would say.
That's a sign of the end times, right there.
And I have a perfect.
What's up?
Go ahead, Tom. No, go ahead, Tom.
Okay, I was just going to say, this is why we're going to have a strike in a few years in the NFL.
And I have the perfect transition because I know where we're going at this point. But since we're going to be talking about MLB Free Agency in a second, but basically Roger Goodell is the Mr. Burns of football. So basically I'll end it on this and then we can talk quickly, is that the reason I say he's the Mr. Burns of football is because he tries to be funny and he tries to be smart, but it seems to fall short every single time he does something. So we gave Roger Goodell asked for, I think, like $50 to $80 million and his own private jet for the rest of his life. But he basically got $40 million. And depending on ratings in the NFL, then he gets the rest of his money in incentives, which at this point, the NFL ratings are declining. And Thursday Night Football is up for grabs right now between Fox Sports and ABC, believe it or not. I heard is in on Thursday Night Football.
So CBS and NBC aren't hosting Thursday night anymore?
Well, that's what I heard. That's what the bidding is at this point. But as I said, Roger Goodell, Mr. Burns.
All right, guys. So let's briefly talk about our own thoughts on free agency before we bring Mike in. So Garrett Cole is now a part of the Houston Astros. Andrew McCutchen is now a part of the San Francisco Giants. The Pirates are selling. Do you hear that? It's the tank.
Well, and this was interesting. If you saw our teaser that we put out before the episode, we asked him about if Pittsburgh now was like the Marlins in 1997, 2003, and even now. And you'll get to hear it coming up right after we're done with this discussion. The interesting answer he gave and how it has some similarities, but it has some differences also.
But meanwhile, the Marlins in their fire sale, it's typical Marlins.
Especially since, we go into now Christian Yelich is upset. So there's going to be more trades than there are going to be actual free agent signings in that guys that are free agents getting paid.
And meanwhile, here's the New York Mets. We don't need Giancarlo Stanton. We don't need Andrew McCutchen. We have Brandon Nimmo.
Well, so if you remember,
the ghost of Adrian Gonzalez back.
Well, if you guys remember, I asked Mike Ferrin, why was Brandon Nimmo so highly touted, and why they rejected that trade, and you'll be very surprised at what Mr. Ferrin says, and he pretty much agrees with us on why the Mets are a little over the top with Nimmo.
Yeah, mind you, he knows what he's talking about. He was a wonderful guest, actually.
Absolutely. So, you know what, guys? Let's just stop the teasing. Let's throw it to that interview we did with Mike Ferrin of MLB Network Radio. Joining us now here on the Unspoken Podcast from MLB Network Radio, Mike Ferrin. Mike, how are you doing today?
I'm good, guys. How are you?
Doing very well. So we got a lot of stuff to talk about going on with Major League Baseball. It's the free agency period. Pitchers catchers report in about a month. But this has really been one of the slowest free agency periods, I think, in the history of Major League Baseball. And Mike, just to start things off,
yeah, I think there are a couple of major reasons why, free agency has kind of gone as slow as it is. I mean, I think you're dealing with a collection of players that are of the premium ones that have some level of flaw to them. So, I think 3 of the 4 starting pitchers that are kind of out there looked at the top of the market, Darvish, Cobb, and Lynn. Obviously, Jake Arrieta is the 4th one, but those first 3 all have had Tommy John surgery in the past. Darvish had a rough postseason. Arrieta's coming off his weakest season in Chicago. Lynn and Cobb, Cobb didn't have his best pitch for most of last year. Lynn struggled in the second half, right? So you keep going down this list. JD Martinez on the offensive side is a great hitter, but he's not been a great defender necessarily over the course of his career. Eric Hosmer's a pretty polarizing player, and you keep going down and down the list, and you start to go, okay, well, you kind of understand why teams may be wary to some degree. And then beyond that, you've got this great free agent class. At least the top of the free agent class is pretty great next year when you look at Harper, Machado, potentially Clayton Kershaw if he opts out of his contract. And then you get the fact that I think teams are less likely to spend money on players who are over the age of 35. Alex Spear from the Boston Globe about 2 weeks ago wrote an article, and the only 2 35-plus-year-old players who were above the league average using offensive wins above replacement were Adrian Beltre and Nelson Cruz last year. That's pretty loud. I mean, that's been a pretty significant decline in production from older players. And I think teams, rather than using the length of the contract to spread out the value of it, have decided that they don't want to be spending that money at the back end of contracts. And the players and their representatives have yet to adjust to take higher average annual values on shorter term deals.
It's funny how this free agency period has kind of unfolded, let's say. We've seen teams that we weren't necessarily expecting to got into it. Now, Pirates ownership seemed a little hesitant at the start of the free agency period, to commit to a rebuild throughout most of the offseason. Now they've traded Garrett Cole and Andrew McCutchen in less than 2 weeks. I mean, what do you think prompted this kind of change of heart from ownership?
Well, I don't think that there was really ever any change of heart in ownership. I mean, I think it was, whether or not the baseball operations people felt like they could try and make a run with the same group that they'd had. And really, the last 2 seasons, they've won, 78 and 75 games. So, it was likely time that group had run its course. I mean, clearly, listen, I think there's a lot of room to criticize Pittsburgh's ownership and the lack of resources they provided them when that window was wide open, in 2014, 2015, maybe even 2016. And I think it's right. It's fair to criticize Pirates baseball operations people for maybe not pushing in more in terms of using premium trade chips to be able to acquire major league players that would help to put them over the top, and maybe in a situation like Kansas City had been in winning a title. But I think now that you're at this point, Andrew McCutchen likely would not get the same return at the trade deadline that he gets right now. And even now you see, again, a player in the last year of his deal doesn't have as much value as you would anticipate based on the name recognition. Garrett Cole has been a league average starter the last 2 years. And while most scouts, and I would agree with them, like Garrett Cole a lot and think he's got brighter days ahead, the fact is that they found a way to try and spread out some of the risk to be able to potentially fill 2, key vacancies at third base and in the rotation with major league average regulars, and to be able to do it under cost control for the next 5 or 6 years. So I think it's once they found the prices that they were willing to, get in terms of or what they wanted in terms of talent. I think that's why they decided to make the deals when they did. And it's a really bitter pill to swallow, I know, for Pirates fans.
Now, I find this a little more fascinating talking about the Garrett Cole situation. Now, I have a 2-parter. So the first part is, how the heck did Garrett Cole end up with the Astros, and why did the Pirates want quantity over quality in the sense that the Yankees prospects that they were getting offered were supposedly better?
Well, you're talking about maybe one prospect that's viewed as better, right? So like the only name that we've really heard or names that we've heard are either Clint Frazier or Chance Adams, and both of them are, prospects with flaws to them as well. And I think, Clint Frazier, I really like crazy bat speed and great athleticism, and I think he's got a chance to be an above average corner outfielder. Chance Adams, the command still isn't quite there. He doesn't really have a third pitch yet. The changeup's still coming. He was a closer in college and he's converted to starter, and he's a guy I think the Yankees are high on, but they could get one of those guys, not both of those guys. And is it better for them to take a higher risk player with a higher ceiling than to get guys that maybe have a higher floor, but you're looking at being able to be contributors? And I think that's what they got with Moran and with Feliz and with Musgrove. I mean, I'm one who likes the risk involved in that. I would rather have the higher upside player because I think you need to be able to acquire stars to be part of your organization. But I certainly understand why they did what they did, because if they're right on their evaluations, and I don't think it's far off to think that Moran and Musgrove and Feliz are basically major league average regulars, they're going to get pretty good bang for their buck over the next 5 years, where there is a chance that, Clint Frazier, if he was that plus, maybe one lower level piece, doesn't necessarily get you the certainty in terms of a return.
That's a thing that I felt I needed to ask you, Mike. Being that we're a New York-based media market, we hear about the Yankees prospects a lot. We hear them reported about on TV, on radio, and in the newspaper and online. And they're really the only prospects that we hear about. Is there a chance that you mentioned that Chance Adams and Clint Frazier, they're good prospects, they have flaws to them, which is not really what we were hearing from the New York media. Is there a chance that we are looking at our prospects with rose-colored glasses? Do we have an evaluation of the Yankees prospects that the rest of the MLB doesn't share?
No, I mean, I think they like the Yankees prospects, and I think it's if you're dealing with players that have high ceilings, you're also a lot of times dealing with players that have risk. So, there's a chance that Clint Frazier is an above average major league corner outfield bat. I mean, think, 25, 30 homer power. But the problem is that there's, what's the floor then, or how far down does the floor fall from that spot, right? I mean, there is the chance that he's not really anything. And I guess that's the case with any prospect. It's just, there seemed to be more certainty in what they got back from Houston, at least in terms of lower ceiling, higher floor players. I think the Yankees system overall is really, really good. And I think part of it is because they have players that have the ceiling like what Clint Frazier has. They have chances to be star level players. I think Gleyber Torres has a chance to be a really impactful offensive infielder. Whether it's at second or third remains to be seen, but that guy's got a chance to be really, really good. And I think that the depth of their system is another thing. I saw Thairo Estrada for the first time this fall and walked away going, well, that guy would be like the number one infield prospect in most organizations. And what's he like? The third or fourth best in the Yankees organization, right? So I don't think it's that the Yankees prospects have been overrated. I think they're really good, and I think it's arguable. You can make the argument that they're in that elite company with Atlanta and the White Sox and San Diego in terms of that group. I just think that it's, if you're a small market team like Pittsburgh and you're 29th or 30th in payroll every year, you're going to trade your biggest asset for the highest risk asset. If you think about it from that standpoint, you kind of start to understand why they did what they did. And again, I'm not a huge fan of the deal. I would rather take the risk in Clint Frazier, but it's easy for me to say that because my tail isn't on the line with a low major league payroll.
It's funny considering how just years ago, the Yankees had one of the worst prospects. You wouldn't be putting them up there with Atlanta and the White Sox. Now, we've heard Josh Harrison's name in trade talks over the last few weeks, but so far he hasn't moved. Could we see him being moved at some point during the season?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's possible. And so here's the thing about Harrison that's kind of interesting. So, like we talked about McCutchen, in the last year of his deal, and I think all you have to do is look at the JD Martinez deal last year to see that corner bats don't tend to move the needle with prospects at the deadline. I think Cole, if you go back to the David Price trade from Tampa, remember Andrew Friedman telling us that he was surprised that 2 years of David Price wasn't going to net as big a return as they thought it was going to, and they traded him at the deadline with a year and a half, and that was a deal that wasn't looked on that kindly at the time, although I think Willie Adames is probably going to be a pretty good player for Tampa. It's a little different with Harrison because Harrison has 2 option years that are left on his contract after this year. So a team could conceivably control him for 3 years and about $33 million, which is pretty good value for the player that Harrison is. You know, he can play second, he can play third, he can play both corners in the outfield, he can play first if you needed him to. I think if you had to play him once or twice at shortstop over the course of the season, he probably wouldn't kill you. You wouldn't like to see him there more than that. But he's a pretty good player overall. And so I don't know that there necessarily needs to be the rush from Pittsburgh's standpoint to move him, because I think he's going to retain value a little longer. That said, we've heard his name mentioned an awful lot in trade rumors this winter. You know, they came up again with the Mets, I think, the other day. He would be a valuable piece on a contending team because he gives you positional flexibility. He gives you a little bit of a speed element, and he's a pretty good hitter.
Just a quick follow-up to that. I'm hearing a lot of reports that the Mets don't really want to part with Brandon Nimmo. Now, is this really a high-touted prospect for them, or is it kind of them just blowing smoke?
I wouldn't go so far as to call Nimmo a high-touted prospect. I mean, I think he kind of, again, he falls into that category of some of the guys we were just talking about with that Pittsburgh acquired. He's kind of a high-floor guy. I think you know what you're going to get. Play all 3 outfield positions, probably shouldn't play center very much. Gets on base a lot. Actually, was one of the best. I think in terms of getting into hitters counts last year, he was one of the best for hitters that saw 750 or more pitches. But he doesn't provide you much power, which leaves him as a bit of a tweener, right? He doesn't have the power for a corner, doesn't have the defense for center field. But I think again, it goes to, and this is a whole nother subject, but the Mets ownership and whether or not they have the willingness or the ability to spend any money if they're still feeling the effects of the Bernie Madoff scandal, in that you have a player that you have control of for 5 more years, and is it easy to replace him for 1 year of Andrew McCutchen? And that's a challenge. I mean, McCutchen is clearly the better player, even if he isn't a very good defensive center fielder. When you're talking about a pretty impactful right-handed bat, I think you could survive with him in center field, certainly for a season if they'd wanted to go down that route. But maybe it is easier for them to move Nimmo in a deal for somebody like, say, Josh Harrison, where they would get 3 years of control back. The other thing is the Mets really value on-base percentage, and I think that's, that shouldn't come as a surprise to anybody. I mean, Sandy Alderson hired Billy Beane, right? So they value on-base percentage, and Nimmo is really good at not making outs when he plays, right? He gets on base a fair amount. Maybe it lacks the impact that you want necessarily in the middle of a lineup, but he's still a valuable player, although his path to playing time has certainly been cut by the signing of Jay Bruce.
Now, looking at the Pirates a little bit, as we were talking about earlier, how this team is kind of in fire sale mode, and also, ironically, talking about the Marlins kind of being in that fire sale mode a little bit. Would you compare this to like 1997 or 2003 and maybe even now?
Well, I don't think the Pirates are in the same mode as the Marlins. I mean, to me, the Pirates still have a very good core of young players that are on the major league team, either in Jamison Tyone or, Josh Bell and Marte and Polanco, and have a fairly strong farm system even before the deals that they made, whereas Miami is in a complete, I think it is similar to 1997. I mean, they traded Giancarlo Stanton not because they were looking to get the best package of players available, but because they were looking to shed his payroll. Now, that to me is much more of a fire sale. And that's what Miami's going through. They have one of the worst farm systems in baseball. It's likely gotten a little bit of a boost from the deals that they made with both with the Yankees, the Mariners, and the Cardinals, but it's still not particularly deep or particularly strong, and they have a lot of work to do before they're going to get back to the path to competitiveness. I think the thing that's really frustrating about those of us who watch the Marlins play really over the last 2 years is that this new ownership group came in and decided that they were going to go down this road despite the fact that they had a win-now offensive team. And I was really disappointed in that, because watching them from afar and seeing them up close, 7 times last year, top 6 in their order were really, really good. And if you could have invested, say $40 million or so for next year's payroll into this free agent market, you could have had a couple of starting pitchers that would have allowed you to compete for a postseason berth. So I think that's where the frustration lies in what Miami has done. But I would basically say that if it's not nailed down, it's got a chance to go. I mean, heck, even it sounds like the home run sculpture has a chance to go. I'm not sure if they can sell it at auction or not.
Speaking of the Marlins, continue on with the sale. Reports have recently come out that the relationship between the Marlins and Christian Yelich is, quote, broken. The term that they used. That was the term that they used.
Trading away all his teammates will do that to a relationship.
That's fair. Do you see
nobody left?
Yeah, I think at some point they're going to deal Yelich. I don't know if they're going to this winter. I think when you look at the number of outfielders that are still available on the free agent market, I think teams can find cheaper options in terms of overall talent. You're just paying money for someone like, I don't know who would be a good comp for. Well, let's just use Carlos Gonzalez as an example, right? Cargo, you're probably looking at a pillow contract, 1-year deal somewhere in that $10 to $12 million range with incentives. Would you rather pay for that for a year if you're a contending team, or would you rather take on, knowing that you would have 5 years of Christian Yelich, but have to give up the amount of prospects that it would take to get him? Because this is now the Marlins are past the we need to shed money. Now they're into the we need to acquire talent. And I think that's where the balance comes from teams. Very rarely do you see players who are kind of on first-generation contracts or sign those first contracts get traded with 5 years of control left. And I think a big reason why is it's very difficult to find proper value for them. I think it tends to happen when you get to like 3 years of control left or 3.5. So maybe this drags on for a while with Yelich. I think that just from a standpoint of how many years they have left, and because of the scarcity of quality at the position, I think JT Realmuto is easier to move sooner than Yelich is. But if somebody is willing to put together a prospect package, and maybe it's a team like, say, Atlanta or the White Sox that are loaded in that regard to be able to acquire Christian Yelich, then I think you're talking about a guy who's an all-star caliber player that you'll be able to get for 5 years.
Not to have to rehash something that's been talked about a lot in the New York papers over the last couple of days. The Yankees reportedly offered Yu Darvish a deal worth 7 years, $160 million, and they pulled it after 2 days. Why do you think Darvish did not accept the offer?
I would assume because he thinks he can get a better deal someplace else. I don't know. I haven't seen those numbers. I question the veracity of some of that. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not sure. That's a lot of money, right? You're talking about $23 million a year.
Yeah.
And that certainly doesn't necessarily fit with what it's tough for me. I wonder how much that passes the sniff test, because it's tough to see, where the Yankees, who are trying like heck to stay under that 197 CBT limit, are going to end up getting right to the crux of it, knowing that you're going to have to add in about $15 million over the course of the season from either promotions or from benefits that get paid to that. So I don't know.
It doesn't make any sense for them to make the deal. That's the thing.
Well, it does. If you're not concerned about the competitive balance tax, then yeah, it makes sense to make the deal. It just doesn't. I thought John Harper's column on it the other day was fairly interesting, in that the Yankees would be interested in kind of that $16 to $18 million range, unless they felt like they could move a significant contract. And I know everybody's focused on Jacoby Ellsbury there, but I don't know who's going to take Ellsbury at this point. If you could save half the money on Ellsbury, I think you'd put yourself in a better position to be able to add someone like Darvish. But again, I'm not sure exactly what Ellsbury's market is, or if there is one, for all the same reasons that we talked about, when there are, approximately 7,000 outfielders that are available on the free agent market that you don't need to trade for or take back $11 million a year in salary for a guy who's had trouble staying on the field.
Looking at some of the information that was put out on Darvish, I don't know if you saw the kind of mysterious tweet he put out the other day, in saying that there's a mystery team involved.
Yeah.
Do you have any idea what his market is, what that mystery team might be?
There's been some speculation that the Dodgers have stayed engaged on him, which would make some sense, although, again, they're much like New York in that they're trying to get under that CBT number. I think the other one would be the Brewers have been linked to Jake Arrieta a lot, and I think my colleague at Sirius, Jim Bowden, said that they've talked on Darvish at least. I don't know how serious that is, but that would be another one. And Mark Ignacio, their owner, has actually been really good about spending money, especially late in the cycle. They've done it with, and now granted, these aren't sound like major deals, but Matt Garza and Kyle Loesch were expensive expenditures for Milwaukee when you consider that they're the smallest media market, right? So, Antanasio is not afraid to spend money there. So maybe Darvish makes sense in that regard. But, I think we can guess at this point, if we have 5 finalists listed in the mystery team, right? And mystery team could be, whoever. I think the Astros are clearly out of that mix now after trading for Garrett Cole. I think Minnesota has a pretty good chance at him based on his relationship with Thad Levine, who's the general manager there, who had been in Texas. And then beyond that, we'll see. Brian Cashman rarely gets beat on a player that he really, really wants. So if he really, really wants you, Darvish, and ownership is willing to take on and maybe, look at a situation where they have to deal with Brett Gardner or something like that to be able to get under the CBT this year, then who knows? Maybe we see it happen. But I'm not sure exactly where his market ends up at this point.
Could you imagine if this ends in a LeBron James style decision?
Yeah, right. Yeah, I love the idea of Darvish hosting a television program to announce where he's going, right? I'm taking my talents to the Mississippi River. And he just puts on a giant fur coat.
As you know, besides Mike being on Sirius XM MLB Network Radio, he's also the pre- and post-game host for the Arizona Diamondbacks. And I wouldn't be remiss if we didn't talk about the Diamondbacks a little bit and pitcher Patrick Corbin. Now, we've seen that he's been on the market. He's been an interesting name that's been thrown out there, possibly with the Yankees. That was earlier in the offseason. Do you see him moving, or are they holding on to him? What do you see with Patrick Corbin?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I think there was a little bit more smoke than there was fire with the talk with New York on that. And I think that's kind of been the case with anything with the D-backs when it's come to starting pitching. So one of the things that they have that's a strength is that they have pretty deep collection of starters with a couple that are close to major league ready in Anthony Banda and Taylor Clark. But I think they realize that, they have them in a lot of different varieties, right? If you're not on Zach Greinke's no trade list and you want to take on the bulk of, a $34 million contract for somebody who's still pitched at an ace level last year, then maybe you could trade for that guy. Or if you wanted somebody who was in the final year of the deal before free agency, thinking that it wasn't going to cost you a ton in acquisition, then maybe you could trade for Patrick Corbin. And they've got guys in between, and Zach Godley, who offers a lot of cheap and a lot of control, or Taijuan Walker, who still gives them a couple of years. And they have Shelby Miller coming back from Tommy John surgery. So I think it's natural that they would get hit on their starting pitching because obviously, as we've talked about throughout most of this conversation, right, years of control matter, and it kind of matters for acquisition cost. That said, I don't think that they're trying to move Patrick Corbin. I think one of the things that they're limited by is the Greinke contract. Greinke took up about a quarter of their payroll last year, which is, you don't see many teams make the playoffs when they have somebody do that, especially when they're a pitcher. But Arizona was able to do that. So they don't have a ton of flexibility financially. They'd like to retain G.D. Martinez or do something to address the outfield. But I think that that's one of the natural reasons why Corbin's name has come up. Okay, well, you can see him making about $7.5 million this year. I think he agreed to that number. It would give them a chance to maybe save a little cash, add a player or two further down in the system. But I don't think that it's likely that they would move him. And I think, really the way Corbin pitched the last 2 months of last season was impressive. And I think if they have hopes of getting back to the postseason this year, which I know they do, he's going to be a key part of their 2018 team. So I'm not sure that he's necessarily on the market unless, and I'll add this as a caveat, unless they were going to be able to acquire another starter to help fill that spot. And whether that be in free agency or via trade, that would be the other thing, is that I think that they really believe, because the strength of that team was starting pitching last year. I think they had all but 17 starts from their regular five, or most regular five. You consider Godley part of that. They need to continue to have that as a strength in 2018 if they're going to either run down the Dodgers or make it back to the wild card game.
We're talking with Mike Ferrin of MLB Network Radio. Mike, of course, the Yankees have already made a large free agent signing when it comes to Giancarlo Stanton. There have been all these talks about getting possibly yet another starting pitcher. Regardless of if that works out or not with Yu Darvish, do you think there's something that the Yankees could still do this offseason?
Yeah, I think second and third base. Something they need to address one of those spots. I think. As much as I like Thairo Estrada, and as much as Tyler Wade and Ronald Torres' name have come up, I think Gleyber Torres isn't going to be ready to be in the big leagues on opening day for no other reason than he missed just over half the season last year with the Tommy John surgery on his non-throwing elbow. So he's going to need a little time to get ready. And I do think that you need to fill one of those spots from the outside. Now, whether that's bringing back Todd Frazier or going down another route, I think that that's the most likely move, outside of somebody like Darvish for New York. And I would not be surprised if that's kind of where their focus lies. It doesn't seem like they're in on any of the other starters. It's kind of like Darvish or bust for them. So I would think that that's, second or third base. Like if you got to pick Darvish or second or third baseman on a shorter term deal, I think that's probably the decision that Brian Cashman is trying to make right now.
Now, I must ask you about another former, as in this past season, Diamondback JD Martinez. Now, he was expected when the offseason began to go to the Red Sox or the Giants, but he's still a free agent, and we just found out today what the Red Sox offered him was 5 years and $100 million, but he has not to this point accepted the deal. So why do you think that he is still unsigned at this point late in the offseason?
Well, because I think he's looking for more than 5 years and $100 million. I mean, if that's what the offer was. Listen, I got a chance to watch that show in person for a couple months last year, and it was pretty impressive. I mean, you guys know where the pool is at Chase Field or right center field, right? And he was hitting the ball with regularity over the pool as a right-handed hitter. I mean, that's where, like, Jake Lamb hits them, right? Like, it's what left-handed power hitters drive him. He's a pretty impactful offensive player, and I think even with the kind of tamp down on the market, he's a guy that should, get in that $25+ million a year range. So I think the reason he hasn't signed is that he's probably looking for more years, dollars per year, or both. And I do think that, the longer it stays in that, if 5 years is an option and maybe pushing the AAV higher is part of that, then I do think a team like Arizona could get back in the mix, potentially to sign him if their owner decided that they wanted a luxury item. And Ken Kendrick has done that before. So I'm not surprised he didn't take 5 and 100. I think he certainly can get more than that. I will be surprised really if he doesn't, because this is, with the exception maybe of Harper and Machado next year. I mean, this is going to be the best bat that's on the market in probably a 3 to 4 year stretch, and somebody's going to end up paying for him and be really happy with the offensive production that they get.
But seeing as how he's the only bat there, do you think he's the only big bat, really on the free agent market at this point? Do you think he's kind of being overvalued, at least either by himself or by the teams that are pursuing him?
Well, I don't think he's been overvalued by the teams that have pursued him, because nobody's paid for him yet. I mean, I don't think he's overvaluing himself. I mean, I mean, again, I saw it. I mean, this, you could make the argument that he was the Diamondbacks' best offensive player over the last 2 months of last year, and their second best player was the guy that finished third for the MVP award. So, I don't think he's overvaluing himself. I think he's really bleeping good.
Now, looking into, and we'll wrap up with this, as you started to allude to free agency and some of the guys like Harper and Machado into next year, do you think that maybe had to do with how some of free agency was handled? Because maybe people were looking to save salary for that next offseason?
Yeah, I think a little, and I mean, I think that's a big reason why the Red Sox reset last year and why the Yankees, the Giants, and the Dodgers are all trying to now, right? I mean, they're big spenders. If they can reset their tax rate by going into the CBT for just one season, it's going to put them in a better position to be able to add those guys. And I don't think that those guys are going to suffer the same fate on the free agent market that these players did, because they're going to both be 26 in the first year of their new contracts, in Machado and Harper. So yeah, I think there certainly was an impact in it. But the problem with that line of thinking, if you're a team that's thinking that, is, well, only 2 teams are going to get those players, right? So how do you prepare for a rainy day? And if you're in a chance where you can be competitive, say in 2017, and you were holding out hope that you were going to get Manny Machado or Bryce Harper or whatever, well, why wouldn't you try and take that opportunity to be competitive this year and sign someone like JD Martinez? He could certainly fill that void. So I do think that it has been a factor. I think it's a little short-sighted on most teams' part to go down that road, because a lot of them are going to be left holding the bag. And as much as next year's class has been talked about as being, this incredible class, and you've got Harper and Machado and Dallas Keuchel and potentially Kershaw if he opts out. I think Craig Kimbrell's a free agent, right? There's a lot of big names there. It's kind of a stars and scrubs roster in free agency. There might actually be more depth in playing in the market this year.
I wanted to ask you, since you brought up Machado, do you think that was a game of chicken between the Orioles and maybe the Yankees or any other team that was involved?
No, I think the Diamondbacks are still involved in talking about him. I mean, I think the Orioles are realistic in that they're not going to be able to re-sign Manny Machado. And I think if they can fill, a couple of holes that they have by being able to move him and still remain competitive in the short term, then they will do it. It's just a matter. I mean, there's a couple of things that factor into it. What is their ask? I mean, we heard initially when they were willing to listen to him that they were going to talk about they wanted 2 starting pitchers. Well, that's not likely to happen. have heard the interim that they need starting pitching and they would need somebody at third base to replace Machado. Now, if they could get one starter and a third baseman, would they do it? Well, then that's up to the owner, and nobody knows what Peter Angelos is going to do. I mean, the man has done an awful lot for helping people who've been wronged by employers in the past. I mean, he was the guy who fought, a lot of workers who had mesothelioma, who got that from, asbestos. And so I hate to make the comparison to Mr. Burns, but in that regard, but he has been known to have one of his patented changes of heart. And you could go into that situation thinking you had to deal with the Orioles, and Peter Angelos suddenly decide, nope, we're keeping Manny Machado this year. So I think that's part of the real problem that you have in dealing with Baltimore in this, is that you're trying to please their baseball operations people and Dan Duquette and company there, and then you're trying to please the owner, and you're also trying to please the manager and Buck Showalter, who has a significant amount of power, and you're not quite sure whether or not it's 1st and 10 or 1st and goal at any given time, because you don't know where the goalposts are because they kept being moved by different people. I mean, seriously, that's what it is dealing with the Orioles in a lot of it, because you don't know. You can have a deal in place, and then all of a sudden some crazy medical thing is going to train wreck it, and whether or not it's medicals or if it's the owner deciding that he just didn't want to do it, whatever happens, so things go haywire when you're going down that road. So until Manny Machado puts on somebody else's jersey, I can't see it. I'm not sure that it's going to happen. And I really don't think it's going to happen with the Yankees or the Red Sox, because I think Peter Angelos would probably fire his entire staff if they were to agree to something like that.
Like playing tennis with a brick wall or smoking one of those exploding cigars.
Oh, God.
You got a better chance with a brick wall, I think.
And yet the Orioles, I think, kind of needs to do something. I mean, they got a bunch of free guys they might lose within the next couple of years.
Yeah, I mean, Adam Jones is a free agent after this season as well, and Zach Britton is too, although Britton's going to miss obviously the first half of the season because of that Achilles injury. I mean, their system has gotten better. I think Austin Hayes is going to be a pretty good player for them. They've got a few others, Cedric Mullins, who's a center fielder who'll probably be a Bowie this year in Double-A, and Ryan Mountcastle will be that. He's a third baseman for now, but he's probably a left fielder. I mean, they've got some guys there. They've got Hunter Harvey in their organization, who's, finally healthy again and was a first-round pick and really burst on the scene. So, I mean, it's not like they're completely devoid of talent where, they're in a similar situation to when, say, Andy McPhail took over and they had to really work hard to add a lot of major league talent to get back to or close to major league talent to get back to competitiveness in a 4-year time span. But they still are, you're right. I mean, that they've got a lot of decisions to make after this season. And even though they haven't been afraid of spending money, I mean, it seems highly unlikely that they would be able to sign Jones, Britton, and Machado. And I would guess that Jones probably comes at the biggest discount, although with the biggest risk because of his age.
We've been talking with Mike Ferrin of MLB Network Radio and the pre- and post-game host for the Arizona Diamondbacks. Mike, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, guys, my pleasure. Take care.
And that's going to do it for this edition of the Unspoken Podcast. Go like us on Facebook, Twitter, Periscope at the UDUP, and our new Instagram account, also at the UDUP.
Pictures of food everywhere.
If you're looking for LeVar Ball and his family and the pictures of Lithuania and that stuff, then go to our Instagram account.
We may actually put a solid gold toilet or two in there, too. So keep your eyes open.
We might.
We actually might. Go like and follow the Undetermined Podcast Network itself at the UD Network, Facebook, and Twitter. Go like and follow all the rest of the Undetermined Podcast Network accounts. And that's going to do it for us. So for Nick Fodera, Nick Morgasen, I'm Tom Albano. A special thank you once again to Mike Ferrin for coming on. And we'll see you next time on the Unspoken Podcast. Cheap Seat Sports Production Party, Undetermined Podcast Network. Good night, everybody.
Good night, everybody.
See you next week.